Srebrenica, grad čiji počeci dosežu do...
This 1980s tourism film depicts the Srebrenica that once was, a town renowned for its spas and healing thermal baths. On the eve of war, many families were intermarried Serbs and Muslims.
Before the war, we had good relations with non-Muslims, both Serbs and Croats. We celebrated their religious holidays with them. There were no differences between us.
Kada Hotic lost her husband and son in Srebrenica. She had been married to Sead Hotic for 30 years.
He was a joker. I enjoyed having coffee with him on Saturdays and Sunday mornings. I didn't want anyone to come and spoil the moments while we were having coffee.
By the summer of 1995, war had completely transformed Kada Hotic's hometown. Srebrenica was swollen by more than 40,000 Muslims seeking refuge in the UN safe haven.
We had no water, we had no electricity, and the biggest problem was, of course, with food. We almost died, from starvation.
Hasan Nuhanovic is a Muslim and a Srebrenica survivor.
The only way where we could go was Srebrenica town, which was the only town controlled by Bosniak forces. We stayed there for 3.5 years because there was no way out. It was, completely besieged by Serb troops.
On July 11th, 1995, the town falls to General Mladic's 6,000 Serb soldiers. At the time, the Dutch peacekeeping force assigned to protect Srebrenica's refugees numbers just 450. They have no heavy weapons, little fuel, and lack clear authority to employ deadly force. As Srebrenica falls, a column of some 15,000 Muslim men flees to the hills surrounding the city. Roughly 25,000 panicked civilians head for refuge at the Dutch base in the village of Potocari, 3 kilometers down the road.
Each one of them knew what it means to be captured by Serbs.
Hasan Nuhanovic was the Dutch battalion's official interpreter in Srebrenica. Today he's returned to the deserted UN compound to recall the events that took place here.
No matter if you're a soldier or a civilian or whatever, if you're captured by Serbs, your chances to survive are very, very close to zero.
In the first few hours, thousands of people flood onto the Dutch base. But soon the door is closed. 20,000 others are forced to find shelter in the buildings nearby.
We could not come closer to the UN base. We were near one factory known as galvanization. There stood a crane, which is still there. We sat beneath the crane. There were a lot of people there, children, elderly people, the sick. Children were crying, they were thirsty, there was no water.
The next morning, when General Mladic arrives in Potocari, fear ripples through the refugees gathered there.
Their eyes are wide open, some kind of crazy looks in their eyes, awaiting death, you see.
On the factory yard, Kada and her husband Sead huddle with countless others as darkness falls.
That night was horrible. I could hear whispers. There are 7 bodies over there in a cornfield. Around 20 women delivered babies prematurely out of fear. The Serb told the mother to quiet her baby. He cut off the baby's head and threw it away.
In 3 years of war, the Serbs had already massacred thousands of Muslims in the region. On a smaller but just as brutal scale, Muslim atrocities committed against Serb civilians also took place. It was a cycle of violence about to accelerate dramatically. Among the 5,000 Muslims who have taken refuge at the Dutch base are Hassan's mother, father, and 18-year-old brother. At the height of the crisis, Hassan's father, Ibro Nuhanovic, is appointed as one of the lead negotiators for Srebrenica's civilians. They and the Dutch commander meet with General Mladic in a nearby hotel.
Ibro Nuhanovic, diplomirani ekonomista, bivši predsjednik. Pod broj 1, trebate da položite oružje I svima koji polože oružje.
Mladic's promise of safety brings little comfort. His forces have killed and abducted UN soldiers before. Surrounded and outnumbered, the peacekeepers begin to fear for their lives. On the afternoon of July 13th, the Dutch make the decision to force all refugees other than UN employees off the base.
What they did, they put 2 plastic tapes from that big hangar to the main gate. The Dutch wanted them to go right there, to the main gate, where Serb soldiers and Dutch soldiers were standing together. There were some German shepherds, with Serb soldiers, barking at the people. It was a terrible sight.
What's going on today here?
You know what's going on.
I want to make sure that, my family stays on the base.
Hassan hopes that his status as a UN employee and his father's as a negotiator will force the Dutch to protect the entire Nuhanovic family. But soon a Dutch major tells him they cannot all stay.
He just said, tell your father he can stay inside the base. At that moment it meant I could stay inside the base, my father can stay inside the base. My brother cannot and my mother cannot. So he wanted my family to split in 2. And I told my family we were going to be killed. We were all going to be killed. I was begging on my knees. And then my father asked, what about my other son and my wife? He said, tell your father, if he doesn't want to stay, he can leave too. My mother was crying. She even fainted at a certain point. And my brother jumped from his chair. He told me, Hassan, don't beg them anymore for me. He said, f*** them all.
Outside the gate, Serb soldiers begin separating Muslim families. Women, children, and a few very old men are placed on buses. Men and boys are held behind.
On your right is the UN base. Of particular interest here is a house on the left-hand side of the road, which is called the White House. It's described by many witnesses and survivors as a holding point. It's called the White House simply because it's painted as such. The men went to places like this house. Their luggage, their bags, their personal belongings were dumped outside the gate here. And we have footage of a huge pile of sacks and bags and backpacks for these men. One of the United Nations military observers approached here and said what was happening to the men. He was told they're being screened for war crimes. And he asked why then are their personal belongings, including identification documents, being taken from them. And he was told that they would no longer need those documents and those belongings.